This lab is all about UV mapping to help give you more control over applying textures to your three-dimensional objects. So you're going to start by just opening table, blend file, and really the purpose of this is to give you a chance to understand why you need this feature that we're going to demo. So I've opened the table, and I want to remind you that you have view options in these little round buttons in the top right corner. So I'm in the shading view right now, but I want to remind you have wireframe view, shading view, and then the materials preview. By the way, the last one is the render preview. You can see we haven't added any lights yet, so it's dark in here. But let me go back to materials preview. And the idea is if you take a look at this, it looks like in some areas the wood grain texture looks right. Like I think the top of the table looks the way I expect it to. But on the sides of the legs, it's a little bit confused about how to apply the texture. So far, there has just been a material created, and then a wood texture JPEG has been applied. So you could say that sometimes when you're applying textures like that, certain surfaces might look strange, or maybe you could say Blender's kind of confused about how to apply the texture. So UV mapping would help in this scenario because we could have a little more control over how the texture is applied to specific surfaces. And the process involves creating a two-dimensional map from your object and then giving you more control over how you're applying the textures to the 2D map. So the purpose again of that table was just kind of give you the idea of why we need this feature. And then we're going to start by learning the process using a simpler file. So we're going to open up a cube. So you can go ahead and open UV editing number 1 for the next part of this assignment. So I've opened Blend 1. I've switched files, and there's a cube in it with different colors on each surface of the cube. The layout it opened to looks a little bit strange on my workspace in Blender. Looks unfamiliar. So let me draw your attention to the tabs up at the top left area. And we're actually in UV editing mode when I opened the file. It defaulted to that. It was probably the last view it was in when it was closed. And you're more accustomed to being in layout view or tab, I could call it. So you can try that. You can click layout, and this is the normal working view that you're accustomed to. And take a minute and look at the cube. I'm going to just drag with my mouse wheel and view this a few different ways, or you can use your gizmo, to preview. And each side's a different color. So we have material applied where somebody has been able to have really a lot of control over getting each square of color to land on a specific face. So this is an example of UV mapping that's already taken effect. So we're going to kind of deconstruct first, try to understand how that came to be, and then you'll create one of your own, kind of work forward. But again, it's already had materials applied in a very precise way to get, again, like the green square on a particular surface. To work with UV editing, you do go up and click the UV editing tab, and that'll open kind of a split view for you. And you're still seeing the three-dimensional object in this pane. And then I'm seeing the two-dimensional layout and the artwork that's applied. And by the way, there has been base material created, and there's a PNG texture that's already been assigned at this stage. So the process that was actually used to create that was a 2D diagram was generated from the three-dimensional shape and then exported and taken over to Photoshop to create artwork that maps to each surface. So again, we're kind of deconstructing by examining one that's already created, getting a little used to this workspace too. I'm going to toggle back and forth between layout and UV editing one more time to get you accustomed to that view and going there when you want to work with UV editing. So I've just accomplished this setup so far where I open UV editing 1 And we've been exploring just clicking on the editing tab for UV editing versus the layout tab, which is taking you back to our normal viewport. Let's do this step together where we'll view our cube in edit mode and select faces and see them correspond to our artwork. So I'll bring up Blender, and on the right hand side in the three-dimensional view, let me remind you that you can switch between object mode to do things to the overall shape or edit mode to work on individual pieces. So make sure you're in edit mode. Don't forget that affects the toolbar too. You get more tools when you're in edit mode. The other reminder is in edit mode, you can click to edit points, lines, or faces in these little buttons next to edit mode drop down. So make sure yours is in face select. And then I'm also going to check which tool I'm in. I'm in the select tool. And therefore I can start to click on different faces of the cube to select them. And take a look what happens on the left side in the UV area. So when I click and select an individual face, you can see it highlighted with a line. This can be helpful actually to see which surface of your three-dimensional object has a particular area of the artwork assigned to it. You could also turn this and select some of the other faces and see their corresponding artwork area. So you can see this one's kind of been unwrapped into almost a T shape to represent all the surfaces of the cube. Let's deconstruct for a second how the material was assigned to the object. And I think I'll go back to object mode instead of edit mode. And using the select tool, I'm just going to make sure the entire cube is selected. So this has a base material that was created. Remember that you can make new materials over here or remove materials with the little X on. And then there's an image that's part of that base material. So just below base color is a little area where you can drop down and select images. So for example, I can kind of deconstructing. I can remove the current image with a little X to pull it off. You can see what that would look like without any kind of material applied to it at all. And I could come in and create a new material, or I can drop down and use materials I've used earlier. So I can actually pick the UV texture here. And there was also a browse icon that looked like a little folder. You can like browse to a texture you haven't used recently. So it's just a kind of reminder that you can create materials, you can have images assigned to them. But what's unique about this is the regions that it's assigned to is matching the surfaces of the object. So having this two-dimensional layout that represents three-dimensional surfaces is super helpful in creating artwork with that kind of precision. We're going to try a little interesting experiment to see that you're able to actually edit the map, the shape, and then that would reapply the texture in different ways is one process of working on. So we'll go back into Blender, and I'm going to switch back to edit mode instead of object mode and make sure I'm in face select. And you can go ahead and click on one of the faces. I'm going to click on this side face and remind you that it's highlighting the edges of it over in the UV editor tab. And you have a tool set actually in that tab. So right now I'm in the select tool. And this is actually really similar to edit mode, because when you're in the select tool, you can choose what you're selecting. You can choose faces or the edges, points. I'm going to choose the edge selection. And then what you're going to see if we experiment for a minute is that you could click to choose either different points or different edges. So in my case, I have that top edge selected, and then I could make movements to edit the map itself. So after selecting that top edge, I'm going to switch to the move tool itself, and then I can pull on these arrows to move in different directions. So let me first pull up with the green arrow. And what's kind of interesting is you can see the artwork sort of being stretched or reapplied differently if I edit the map itself. Just as an experiment, I'm going to grab the red arrow and drag to the side. And whatever artwork is falling within my stretched map is also displayed on that surface over on the object. So it's kind of an interesting idea. You can edit the map itself, and then it's distorting the image to correspond to your shape. After you try that, make sure that you undo. I'm going to use Control Z, like zebra. I can hit that twice to restore it. That's going to be Command Z, like zebra if you're on Mac. So yeah, make sure you do restore that back to the original shape that we worked with. And then we'll go to the next step.